Great, thanks a lot, John. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So we'll dive straight into it. I'll give a very brief intro into who I am. So yes, my name is Shabbir. I currently work as a delivery lead at The Economist. I've essentially worked in different delivery related roles for several years now, and I've been fortunate, or maybe some might think unfortunate, to have been involved in a lot of transformations of one sort or another, and therefore I have some of the battle scars to share with everyone today. So that's what I'll be doing. So I'm going to dive straight into the talk. So I'm going to be covering a little bit of context to start with, just kind of when typically do companies attempt to scale up and go through some form of transformation, what happens during this scaling, and that's where we see a lot of these kind of the pitfalls. Certainly I've experienced a fair few, and the bulk of the time that I really want to spend on is talking about those specific pitfalls and some potential solutions that you yourselves, potentially as delivery people, as agile people, or even as people who are just passionate around agile and transformations, can try and do to kind of bring some form of semblance and kind of structure to the huge bits of chaos and what people might think as organized chaos that you often get with a transformation. And those themes are often around collaboration, communication, and actually agility. We say agile transformation, and often we end up going so far away from any form of agility that it doesn't look anything like what someone might think of as agile. So those are the things that I want to try and cover off in about 20 odd minutes. So just diving straight into this. Scaling. So when we want to scale up, there's usually a couple of causes for scaling up, a couple of reasons why typically a company would decide, right, we need to scale up, go through some form of transformation in order to achieve something. And usually the two reasons when you really dive into it are, one, there's an increase in demand, maybe there's kind of more business needs, the business has been growing, which is a good thing, and therefore they want to deliver more things from a software perspective, or there's an increase in complexity. I can certainly think of times during the course of my career where we've had to scale up just because we've had some complex things come our way. One of the ones that really kind of sticks in my mind is actually a regulatory one around GDPR, just kind of when that first came. I'm sure a lot of people who had gone through software projects relating to that can understand the complexity that came along with that, and therefore the need to sometimes scale up just to even deal with that while you're still dealing with business as usual pieces of work. And often what we end up actually seeing when we go through some of this is an increase in numbers. Sure, we kind of increase our team sizes or structures. Maybe we can increase some of our statistics, like so-called perceived productivity and output and so forth, as a result of the scaling up. But often we end up losing that sense of culture and identity that our individuals and teams have, and also we end up losing some of that agility, the ability to actually being able to release iteratively in smaller chunks, get quicker customer feedback. And that's really kind of what I want to touch on as well today. Why is it required? Again, this is more for context purposes. Sometimes a company just simply has a new company direction. Maybe that comes from a change in leadership, a new owner of the company. I've actually been through a merger of two companies, which resulted in complete change of our leadership team, and therefore we decided to go down a bit of a tech overhaul. That's usually one of the things you often see. Or another one of the things that you often might see is there's a realization that actually our tech suite or solutions or whatever systems we have in place doesn't really meet the business needs, and therefore we need to go through some form of a re-platform or migration. And of course, maybe you might decide to do one or the other depending on which kind of context you're in. But this is typically the kind of two main reasons I've seen for either a tech overhaul or re-platform, and hence doing some form of transformation at the end of it as well. And what happens next? I'm sure, hopefully you can comment in the box on YouTube as well if you can relate to this. I'm sure a lot of you people have seen this. Is typically we end up going through some form of analysis phase, and often when we're doing some of these transformation programs or projects, we end up getting some preferred consultant on board to help us with that. They assess what our today's state is, they assess what our desired future state is. There's some contract negotiations, of course, and then we are essentially predefining some development plan with hard release dates and milestones in place, and off we go, right? That sounds like a great recipe for success, or does it? what inevitably happens is, we need more people. So therefore, we put a lot of hierarchy in place because it's required to organize all of that chaos. And don't forget, we're obviously enforcing team structures and ways of working. And often, I've often quizzed this to various people who have been involved in transformations or who are attempting to drive some form of transformation. The reason I'm often given is it's for consistency, and I'm not sure if I really have understood what that means yet, because I've not really seen much value in that consistency. Often we're actually taking away value from teams being able to be autonomous, being able to be empowered in what they're working on and releasing, and actually providing value to the business. We often end up taking away from that, and hence why I've written over here, it results in a loss of that individual and team identity. So hence it's got that impact on culture, and also our work structure actually means we're probably losing some form of agility. We're actually not being able to be as agile as we would have liked. Right, so the pitfalls. I've got 8 pitfalls that I'm going to go through. These are things that I've experienced and seen, and I just want to talk through each one and hopefully give some suggestions on what you can do to try and get over that pitfall or try and avoid it completely. One is not consulting your existing teams. We often go through this transformation. We decide, right, let's bring in some experts because surely they're the ones who know how to do all of this before. And yes, that is true to some extent, but also we should really consult our teams because they have invaluable domain knowledge that anyone coming from the outside is not really going to be able to tell us about. They're going to either spend a lot of time, money, and effort finding out the same things that your people can already tell you, and therefore it's really vital and valuable to actually consult your existing teams. Ultimately, if you're looking at this more from a kind of program portfolio budgeting perspective as well, you can save on some cost there as well. Often you're using a lot of high paid consultants to do stuff and tell you stuff that really people that you already employ know and can already share with you. The second pitfall is planning for it all and trying to get certainty on releases. And a great quote, unfortunately, I don't know who said this at first, but you're essentially trying to plan for everything at a point in time where you know the least about that project, which is right at the beginning. And whenever I share this quote with anyone, they realize it, but I don't know if it fully lands. If you really think about it, you're essentially trying to put together often an end-to-end plan in quite often a waterfall fashion at a point in time where you've pretty much experienced nothing. You may have not even done a discovery phase. You're probably going to time box a discovery phase, and you're kind of hoping off the back of that discovery phase, you're going to have all or most of the answers that you can then plow through a whole development phase with, or go through some form of transformation. And it sounds pretty crazy that you're trying to do that and often work with a big budget to try and achieve this. Well, why not just use some planning increments? And I know this is a concept of SAFe. I'm actually not a fan of SAFe myself, but I do like the idea of this when you're dealing with complex programs, to get away from some of that waterfall methodology. It's just to plan in increments. Maybe an increment for yourselves can be a 2-month period, a 3-month period. Plan for that period, see what happens, learn from the feedback that you experience during that period, and then plan for the next one. And it's often something that I see a lot of programs and projects spend countless kind of man hours just putting together these end-to-end plans, which can literally change when one tiny thing happens, and then you're spending more hours essentially readjusting that plan. The next pitfall is kind of rapidly scaling in the hopes of faster delivery, and quite often we see the impacts for the company's culture happen here, and that's kind of what happens with the team. One of the things that I've never really seen done what I would consider to be in a correct manner is actually giving time to the teams for team bonding, for defining what their ways of working are, for defining what their communication methods are, for defining exactly how they are going to be working together. Quite often we end up scaling up, putting new people together or new teams together, and the time that they actually are given to bond is usually a sprint. So 2 weeks, and then you're expecting them to often work on these complex programs of work for the next year, 2 years or so. I think we really need to think about how much time we should be factoring in up front to allow the teams to bond and settle together. And at the end of the day, if you do this correctly up front, you're going to be saving on a lot of time later, which can often result in problems. You know, if your team just isn't performing optimally, they're not able to communicate with each other. And this is probably more so important nowadays when we're all working remotely. You know, if they haven't got that kind of seamless communication methods down and agreed upon, then often there's just going to be wasted time throughout the whole project, which will add up to a significant amount. And that's why I think this is a point where I've never really seen a complex program of work give the necessary time, in my opinion, right up front to focus on ways of working, agreed communication methods, and so forth. And of course, we all love a big bang release, right? One of the biggest pitfalls you see in some of these complex things is just a big bang approach, where there's just a transformation program just around ways of working, whether it's like a re-platforming migration sort of thing or whatever it might be. Any complex program often has some form of big bang approach to it. And actually, why can't we define what our first end-to-end vertical slice is to provide your customer value? That can even work if you're just thinking about changing your ways of working across an entire department or division. What is that end-to-end slice? So what can you work with, you know, virtual teams or anything like that to provide your customer value and get a slice of your division working in an agile manner? At the end of the day, this will be able to de-risk your whole program because you can prove it works in some smaller iteration, get feedback, take the learnings, and then move on to the next slice. And ultimately, you'll be able to deliver quicker as a result. You're actually, if you're looking at releases as a result of this, you'll be able to get something out as a vertical slice first and then work on stuff iteratively after that. So number five, forgetting your communities. And I see a lot of companies these days do have communities of practice. But I kind of feel they often turn into enforced talks by people with a rota that, you know, you must present something, and quite often it's pretty much the stuff that they've been working on. I think what you really need to help foster and grow is actually their passion for the technologies that they're involved in and whatever the discipline they might be involved in. And the best examples I've often seen end up creating a really highly engaged, passionate community, which then ultimately not only benefits themselves, but also the others around them. It then becomes so much easier to onboard junior engineers, for example, just because they've got passionate people around them and they kind of feed off that passion and they can learn so much for their own skill sets. When you've got a strong kind of internal agile community as well, then often, you know, they're able to share some of their best practices, best ways of working, share their experiences that they've had. And especially if you're going through some form of transformation, I think it's extremely important not to forget your communities, just because they are a very passionate kind of pool of people at the end of the day. They really enjoy what they're doing. They love the tech and whatever it is that they work on. Forgetting about your communities is a really big mistake, because at the end of the day, it can really hurt your culture at the company. Pitfall number 6. So only the higher ups can hire. I've started to see this as a bit of a trend recently, and I'm not sure if it's a tactic to just save on time that the team might get involved, might see as being a draining factor or something else. But I've started seeing a lot of managers or people even away from a team are the ones who are responsible for hiring. So if there's like an engineering lead, for example, they're the ones who are the only people involved in a recruitment process. And obviously that's not right if you think about it. At the end of the day, you want to have a team somewhat being involved at the very least in that recruitment process. At the end of the day, a person is going to be hired for that team. They're the ones who are going to know what that best fit is for the team, not someone who doesn't work with that team day in and day out. And I've seen some good examples at the same time of this, where essentially a team is fully empowered, they're fully involved in the recruitment process, all the way from CV checks all the way to that final interview stage, and they're the ones who are actually making the decision. So if a team themselves and the people involved in that recruitment process, they're the ones who say, yes, that person's a good fit for us, then often the company will support them in that decision and hire that person as well. And that's it feels like an obvious thing to say, but it's extremely invaluable for the team to maintain, what subculture they might have within that team, especially if they are given that empowerment and autonomy to hire people for their own teams. And pitfall number 7, us being in some form of agile or delivery roles, we all love a bit of reporting at the end of the day. I feel reporting is a double-edged sword, and I see value in it, but I also see the waste in it as well, depending on how you're doing it. I think too much often results in a waste of time. You should always be asking yourself, who's reading this at the end of the day? What is it that they actually want to know, rather than me just spending hours and hours producing reports on projects and providing fancy graphs and charts and numbers? What is it that they actually need to know? And let me figure out what is the best way of providing that information for them. I think there is an aspect of providing too little reporting can result in a bit of lack of confidence, just because there's no visibility there. And I think we should always encourage transparency. We don't want to have people in the business, or whether they're kind of like senior leadership team or whether it's our actual business stakeholders, thinking something's being hidden from them. I don't think that should be the case. I think there's a balance that basically needs to be found. And some of the best ways that I usually find of reporting stuff was trying to automate it. So really understanding what is the data or report or something that a business stakeholder or a senior leadership member might need, and then seeing, can we automate that? Are there some dashboards we can provide? I've even mentioned roadmaps in Jira, for our business stakeholders. Do they just want to understand our progress? Because maybe from their perspective, they've got a huge budget to play with. They'd like to know when we can release a product, and therefore they want to know when they can really start planning in some marketing spend and start lining up some agencies to work with. So I think there's definitely clever ways of doing reporting. There's definitely a balance. We don't want to do too much. We don't want to do too little, but we do want to find out what is the value that we want to be given with those bits of reporting. And the last one, and luckily I do have a bit of time to talk through this, but that's no time. Let's not go through a transformation program project or do some big migration thing or re-platform thing or tech overhaul, and then not give our engineers some self-development time or innovation time, or letting teams bond through whatever it is that they like to bond over. Maybe they like to have coffees at 11 a.m. after they've done their stand-up. Maybe they like to go on team lunches, and that takes, 20 minutes longer, once every couple of weeks. Let's give them that time. At the end of the day, keeping that team together, keeping that team bonded, keeping them motivated is the thing that's really going to drive success. It's not going to be taking away these important bits of valuable time that they use for these items. Because that's probably how you're going to lose your best engineers at the end of the day. These are the things that keeps them motivated, going, engaged, and enjoying working with each other to develop great solutions. So taking away from this is not going to help you at all. And that's probably it.
Thank you, Shabbir. It was really, really interesting to hear some of the common pitfalls and how you've navigated through those in the past. We've got our other two speakers who I'm sure may have questions for you, but just from the comments, we've got Neil who's asked, what were the deciding factors on how you split the teams for upscaling, and were they consultants, were they recommended, or were they your own?
Depends where, because I've worked in a few different places having done similar things, and it's been a mix. Sometimes it has been consultant led, and that's often where that's happened. It's usually been because there's been the leadership team have brought in consultants that they've kind of tried and tested in the past, and therefore there's a strong trust element with that consultant partner, and therefore they wanted to go down that route because they felt that that's the thing that's going to achieve the goals that they had in mind. In other places, I've definitely worked with teams who have been able to provide suggestions and actually help shape the teams as they feel. So actually we've consulted people internally to the company, and they're the ones who have actually given the suggestions in terms of, right, we think we need to scale up in these areas. Actually, we should break off that team into a sub team, use them to work on product XYZ and scale up in that manner. So actually it's been a mix of the two, to be honest with you.
Okay. We've got another question from Andy, who asks, do you share all these pitfalls in advance with the teams when you start on new transformations?
So it depends on how the transformation is being kind of put together and structured. The best way I try to share these is through a formal RAID log. So actually defining these and issues and risks, just because that's the language that essentially we're talking with when we're talking about our senior leadership team and management teams. So trying to formulate these risks within the context of the company that you're working with, and putting them into whatever format they have to portray issues and risks. That's often the best way, and that's often how I've done it in the past as well.
Okay. And just before we move on to Roland, I was just wanting to ask if Roland or Mark had a question for Shabbir in regards to his talk.
I guess when I've been in companies before, I like the reporting stack sort of kind of chimes with me, because I've been in places where I've been asked for reporting on QA metrics, and it seems like it's come from like someone high up, you don't know where. And I guess have you seen lots of wasteful reporting in your time?
Absolutely, yeah. I've spent hours on doing reports from random people who have requested it for reasons unknown to me. And often when I've asked for why, one of the answers I often get is it's always been done like that. So they're not actually able to tell me what they want to get out from that data or report. It's just that's always how it's been done. And actually, I've had some good wins where if you actually talk to a lot of these a lot of our stakeholders, essentially from a reporting perspective, and actually try really get to the bottom and collaborate with them on what they want, I've actually managed to eliminate some reports completely in my career, and that's been a great win. And then we've created like very relevant, lightweight dashboards that give them exactly what they really want and what provides them actual value, rather than just providing pages of reports and numbers and metrics just because that's how it's been done in the past.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's difficult to sort of push back on these things for sure.
Yeah, I think it's collaboration. Just collaborate with your stakeholder, try to figure out what it is that they really need.
Yeah.
And finally, Mark, do you have anything you'd like to add or ask in regards to Shabbir's talk?
Yeah, absolutely, Shabbir. You mentioned making sure you give the teams time, and frankly, I couldn't agree more with that. But how have you found that you get around that? How have you found you're able to do that, giving them time for learning, development, adaptation, etc.?
We try to set the tone right from the get-go. So we make sure that we bake those things into our sprints. So we say 20% of our time, and often that might be like a Friday afternoon or something like that, and some other time elsewhere is if we're doing it per week, it might be something like that, or per sprint, whatever it might be. We'll block out some time and say that is your self-development time. We then set some internal quarterly goals for our team to say, right, in the next quarter, let's have a hackathon, because we haven't had one for the last 2 years. So let's actually make it one of our goals for our team to have an hackathon. It'd be great if we can get some other teams on board as well, but if we can even do it within our team, I think that's at least a win to start with. And then other things like, let's make sure we kind of go for a team lunch every so often. Obviously, that's difficult in this day and age. We actually have virtual coffees every Friday with the team I currently work with in the morning, and that's really helped a lot. We just talk about random topics and what's going on in the world these days, and that's really helped, learn things about the team that none of us would have known about otherwise.
That's a great idea. The team I'm currently working in have just instigated that, and our first one is tomorrow, which we're really looking
fantastic.
So, yeah, great call. Nice one.
Nice.
Thanks, Mark. And we've just got one more question. I think we can squeeze in from the comments. So David asks, any thoughts on how you can tailor approaches in the current remote environment?
I think it's even more important for those team things now in the current environment we're in than before. So I think really trying to go out of your way to do whatever you can for team bonding, virtual workshops, if that's what you need, spending a bit more time doing, discovery phases and stuff like that, if that's what you need. Really identifying what you can do and what you can do to bring the team together, and talking more, collaborating more. I think that's just even more important now than it has been in the past.